Action. And welcome everybody. This is PnP Weekly, episode 152. In the PnP Weekly, we'll talk about the latest in Microsoft 365 platform and in the features in general. My name is Vesa Juvonen. I'm a program manager in the Microsoft 365 platform side of the house. And with me as a co-host is Waldek. So quick intros.
Hey everybody, my name is Waldek Mastykarz and I am Cloud Developer Advocate for Microsoft 365 at Microsoft.
You do a much better job on your title than I do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Today we'll have a discussion with Hugo Bernier, and actually let's speed up the things a bit. So let's jump directly to that discussion, and we'll do a quick summary after the interview on that. But let's jump in there. So welcome, Hugo, and to the PnP Weekly, episode 152. You've been actually in the PnP Weekly. Maybe we should have actually done some research.
Wow. In the 80s, I think.
Yeah, I think it was 80s. Yes. Yes.
It's been 82 years.
Was it a year ago or 2 years ago now? I think it was like 2 years ago.
Might be, actually. Might be. You were an MVP at the time, right?
That's right. That's right.
So, but something has happened between that, and maybe not everybody knows what has happened. So can you talk about what are you doing nowadays and who are you? And do a quick intros.
Well, I'm Hugo Bernier, and I am now a Microsoft Cloud Solution Architect. I've been at Microsoft for 11 months now, so it's kind of it's been surreal, honestly. So I do that during the day, and at night, I usually work on community initiatives like sharing is caring, working on samples and solutions and things like that, and pretty much anything else that I need to do.
And before you came to Microsoft, what were you actually doing? So how did you get to Microsoft? Can you talk about that? Why?
Well, he applied and we hired him.
That's how it works. Thank you, Waldek. So the next question.
Thank you. So I've been working as an independent consultant for probably the better part of 20 years. And so I always had multiple clients, and my whole shtick was to look at companies that had tried and failed to implement some solutions. Usually by the time I got there, it was a second or third time they had tried to do something, and I was usually there to make sure that they would be successful. And I worked really closely with Microsoft, and it was interesting because when I actually told people, hey, I'm joining Microsoft, the two things that I heard was, we thought you already worked for Microsoft, and it's about time. So I think it was kind of a foregone conclusion that it would join Microsoft, and it's just, weird to be able to say that. But yeah, I work for Microsoft.
And you've been so what is your day job then? What do you actually do on day job at Microsoft?
So cloud solution architects are people who come in after customers have acquired licenses for a product. I focus on the Power Platform, and I help customers that just have licenses and they're like, I don't know how to use this. I don't know how to take advantage of it. And I'm there to help them kind of look at removing barriers to adoption and, increasing adoption. So things like in the Power Platform, for example, we look at establishing governance and, establishing a center of excellence and looking at ways that maybe customers haven't thought about using the Power Platform, or parts of the Power Platform where maybe we can save them a lot of time. So an example of this is, I have a large customer that they wanted to take all their vaccine attestations and have people upload vaccine attestations. And when I was talking to them, they're like, oh yeah, so we're going to audit vaccine attestations randomly. We're just going to look at individual documents. And so we're talking about like 200,000 vaccine attestations. And I was like, or you could use, AI services to actually identify outliers, and that way you don't have to manually just try to go find bad documents. The system will look at them for you. So that's the kind of stuff that I do. It's fun. Every customer is different.
Just to clarify on that one, for those who are not super familiar, but that is actually kind of a nice thing that what Microsoft does do for the larger customers, especially as part of the acquisition of the licenses, you will actually be assigned, well, not one by one sign, but you have an opportunity to actually get this architects in place and then basically show the power of the platform and show what dollar sizes can be done. So it's not just about basically, we sold it, yeah, I don't care anymore. It's just and I'm out. No. It's actually we want our customers and partners to really, really, truly be successful on the platform and understand what is the value. And of course, if you think about from a business perspective, we want to do that so that they will renew the licenses because that's just good business. So is that happening, by the way? Just out of curiosity, putting you on the spot.
Yeah. I think if you think of, for example, large, government agencies that have PDF forms that have been sitting there since 1980, right? That are on the website, or I'm sure they were not on the website in 1980, but they they have these forms that they ask people to fill in on a PDF when we can actually show them how they can use, for example, model-driven apps in Power Platform and expose those model-driven apps through portals and add all the validation, everything. So remove duplication of data, all that stuff. And then from that point, they have, a Dataverse environment that they can use to manage all these applications. And it's core to their business. So they're not going to, hopefully, they're not going to go away from using the Power Platform. And it leads to a lot more, because I'm a solution architect, I'm not just focusing on Power Platform. I look at the bigger ecosystem, like how does it fit to, with SharePoint and Microsoft 365 and everything. So I love it. It's fun.
Yeah. And I kind of miss those customer cases, to be honest, as well. But that doesn't mean that I have time to actually do that. Anyway, so sorry, just to be super clear, don't send me emails, please.
Dear Vesa. Hugo, if you look back at the last years of work across the different engagement you've had, do you see like a common thread across all of them, like a typical challenge somebody will have, or a common place where people are and common next step you want to take, or is it really across the all over the place?
I think the common thing, I kind of joke about it when I talk with my boss, where I say, hey, it's great. I'm measured on increasing Power Platform adoption. However, the first question IT administrators ask me when we talk about Power Apps is, how do I turn this off? And the reason for that, it's not because they don't see the value, right? They see the value of embracing the Power Platform and everything, but they're concerned about shadow IT, right? People
too much value.
Yeah. It's like, I'm just going to go directly to the database and update the database. So the key to this is, at least in large organizations, is governance, right? So putting in place a real rigorous process that allows you to empower your users to create the solutions they need while still creating a secure environment. And I guess the best way to compare it is, when we moved to this house, we had a backyard.
Beautiful looking living room. Oh, sorry, break room.
Thank you. Yes, I like the colors. So you know how they say that every 40 seconds a person gets into an accident. Well, that person is my son, right? He's so clumsy. He gets into accidents like all the time. He's always bleeding. He's very clumsy. So when we moved here, we had a playset in the backyard and we had a pool. And we wanted to create a secure environment where our children can go play outside and be safe, especially for Sam. That's, again, will injure himself somehow. And so what we did is we put a fence between the pool area and the playset area, and we put rubber mulch in the playset area so that he could just jump off the top of the playset and not hurt himself. And when we wanted to go to the pool, then they could do it with adult supervision.
Yep.
So same idea here with Power Platform, right? Let's create environments where people can actually do their jobs and have fun without hurting themselves. And if there's something that's maybe more, needs to be more IT supported, IT managed, and we have a different environment where we can do that. And the thing, it's easy to build Power Apps, but it also means that it's easy for people to build really crappy Power Apps. And that's the thing that we have to be careful about, is achieving that balance. And so that's the number one theme across all customers is, we want to do it. We just want to establish more governance.
Now, related on
when you look at the customers to whom you talk, right? Like, do you see that folks, like, there is this joke, like who reads a manual? Do you see that folks like really try to get hands-on? I have this available, I'm gonna build an app, or do they follow our courses, go on learn how to do it, and then do it, or really just like let me do things?
It's a lot of hey, I didn't know this feature was available. Let me click on it and let me see how far I can go. And it's a testament to how the platform is built that people can actually build lots of really cool stuff without ever looking at documentation. In fact, it's interesting. Like usually, by the time I start talking to some of these customers, they've done amazing solutions. Some solutions are already in production, everything. And they haven't read any documentation, any best practices, or anything like that, which is amazing, right? But that's also the opportunity.
And that's the challenge from an IT perspective. Coming back on kind of reiterating the IT's, let's say, role, because somebody might think that, well, why is IT then demanding that governance? Why is it actually needed? But then we need to remember, and I guess, Hugo, you're saying this then as part of those engagement, that something when there's an app which is then super successful, which hasn't been under IT's surveillance, and all of a sudden something happens and the system goes down, who are the people going to blame? Well, IT.
Ghostbusters.
Because IT is responsible of running those things. So it's the ITs, CIOs, teams, organizations, CTO teams, whatever it is to set up, responsibility to make sure that the services and products are working properly. So if they're not known, so they're part of the shadow IT setup, and then something goes sideways, and then there's business opportunities getting lost because of that reason, they kind of point finger to the IT and say, you didn't do the job. So it's not that I guess it's also necessarily bad. That's my point on this. So,
but I guess it's also an interesting point, right? Because like, especially when you have the ability for everybody to create things, how do you go about it? Which solutions you onboard with the IT and which you don't, right? Because like you cannot throw everything at the IT because they don't scale for that, right? Which is why exactly in first place we empower people to let them build whatever things they need for their work. But then going back, how do you go about detecting this high value or high demand or important apps in a way to onboard with the IT, and which are you like, like this is a personal thing, we're just gonna keep this as is?
So that's actually the first thing to recognize, I think, is that governance is not one size fits all. Right, you have to think about, well, maybe there's different governance models. And if we look at the SharePoint, example, I remember talking to customers where they were like, "Oh, the marketing department wants to control every content in SharePoint," and I'm like, "So you want, the marketing department to control what the IT team is going to be putting on their SharePoint site?" And we need to review everything. We need to approve everything, right? And obviously that doesn't live. And I'm sure you've heard these customers before.
Yeah.
And so eventually we get them to understand that there's different tiers of governance, right? One which is more compliance driven, and maybe that's preventative. Like for example, the CEO's page, right? Which probably should only be written by the CEO or the marketing team. And then there's like my personal site, my team site, and my things like that, which is more audit based, right? Let's just let people create the content they need, and then let's go back and make sure that no inappropriate content is stored. So same thing with the Power Platform, where you look at, well, I have maybe IT-led initiatives that are mission critical, that are used by everyone in the organization. I have IT-supported initiatives where maybe IT didn't have time to create the entire solution, but maybe they can create the infrastructure to support it, like APIs, PCF controls, and things like that. And then I have the kind of personal productivity initiatives that are, I need my team and I to be able to automatically do this, but it's not mission critical, it's not anything, and I don't need anybody else to support me. And when you start looking at it from that perspective, then things start kind of fitting into place, because it's like, okay, I understand how a maker probably doesn't want to start using GitHub and DevOps to actually store their code in source control, but there's some tools that we can use to actually make that process easier without them ever having to go through GitHub and DevOps.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense.
It does.
Absolutely. And it's basically it's the explanation why there's no single yes and no answer in any of this stuff. It's always dependent on the customer cases, and that's why we need solution architects like Hugo, like you, or consultants who come there, ask the right questions, and then adapts the best practices, which is a wrong term to say, the good practices within the organization. There's no best practices because
best
one man's
it's always best in the context of, right? Like it's not the best for everybody, it's the best in context of, right?
Yes.
So it's interesting because I was going to say, like I've been doing the same thing for, I don't know, 20, 25, 30 years. Yeah, I started when I was 2. But every single customer is different because of that reason, right? Yes. Even though it's the same topic, it's the same conversation, the outcome is very different. And that's what makes it interesting for me, because I get bored really quickly.
Yeah.
Well, but it's also that like
humans, different people, chemistry and all of that. So.
Yeah.
And I can imagine that over the course of years, like you've seen the same needs being answered in different ways, but it's still the same thing. Like people need to solve the same problems. And I mean, maybe the places that they used to, maybe way back when they did it in Notes, then maybe in VBA, in Excel, I don't know, and now Power Apps. Like it's just it shifts where people solve their needs, but the problems are still there and are still the same, right?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, this is something that we've talked about in the past where I'm autistic and, you know, I feel it's important to talk about neurodiversity. And as an autistic person, I find patterns in everything I do, right? And I establish processes and methodologies and frameworks, but I see patterns in everything. And that's definitely patterns that I see with customers. It's like, it doesn't matter if they're talking about, you know, Lotus Notes or SharePoint or Power Platform.
Access.
The same patterns are coming over and over again. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's where the human interactions and that's why this IT is still people business, because it's all about having that discussion, understanding the requirements truly, and not just making IT-driven decisions and you'll take this tool and make stuff happen. I was like, no, I don't know how to use this.
But it's also an interesting thing, right? Because like if you, especially for folks who have been around for a longer time, right? There is this sentiment that, oh my God, things change so quickly and I need to keep up and pace is high and I'm obsolete. Like that's not the case, right? Because if you unpack the problems, the first perception, whether it's Power Apps or whatever it is, if you unpack that, eventually you will find the same problems, as we said, as people had in the past. It's just a different aspect, right? And I guess that is exactly where the experience comes into play, because you have that perspective and experience and you can look at it like, wait a minute, like this is the same thing. And sure, the technical answer at the end will be different, but the problem is really the same. And very much like depending on complexity, problem isn't often the tech. It's the people behind it, the processes, the agreements, and also the way you communicate any change at all. And that's the same thing, right? That's the same thing we've been doing over the years.
Yeah. And it's an interesting conversation, because when I'll talk to, you know, more senior IT developers, right? And we're talking about the Power Platform. They're like, I can build this a lot faster, you know, from scratch using, I don't know, C# or React or whatever. And I'm the same way. Like I'll look at something and I'll be like, I could build this in SharePoint Framework in no time, or I can do it as a Power App. And maybe for me, it would take a little bit longer because I'm not as good with like Canvas-driven apps as I am maybe with model-driven apps and things like that. But the argument that I'll make with them is, yeah, that's a valid point, but it's based on two assumptions. One is that the requirements are 100% correct. And how many projects in your entire career have you been on that the requirements were correct from the start?
Yeah.
And two is it's based on the fact that the requirements are not going to change ever after the solution's been deployed. And organizations that have survived through COVID and things like that are the ones that were able to adapt quickly, and they were able to do so because they had systems in place that would allow them to suit their changing business needs. And so this is where the difference between, let's say, something that I would do in Power Platform or something that would do it in C# comes in. If it's an infrastructure, an API that is never going to change, because that's never going to change in the last 10 years within the organization, maybe it's an API that I use to actually feed to this backend systems. But if it's a form that changes every year because of the new regulatory compliance or whatever, the business rules, then maybe I can get a SharePoint developer to build an SPFX web part or a Viva, adaptive card or something like that. Or maybe I can actually let the business build the form themselves, right? And I'm focusing on where I can add value with the infrastructure. So it's an interesting conversation.
For sure. Now, from a timing perspective, let's flip a bit on a different topic, because you've been also...
things you do in the evening.
Yes, exactly, as a hobby. So can you talk about a bit on your involvement in the community and open source side of the house?
Yeah, so my thing has always been, I learn by example, right? I love, when I learn a new technology, I love reading the entire documentation once, and then, I won't remember it, but I'll remember, oh, wait a minute, I remember there's a function that does this. I can look it up. I can do whatever. But often the documentation is not really well suited for, here's how to actually use it, right? They'll give you some little code snippet, but it doesn't show you where to fit it into the page or in the process and things like that. And that's where, to me, samples are awesome. It doesn't matter if it's, adaptive cards, web parts, Power Platform. The best way to learn is by looking at something. And that's where I've been focusing a lot of my efforts, is creating kind of repositories or maintaining repositories to create samples around all these things. And the one area that I focus on is obviously SharePoint Framework and web parts and extensions. And it's been interesting because we're always adding new versions of SharePoint Framework. We're always adding new samples. The community is doing an amazing work with creating samples. And it's not like we have to beg people, hey, please do this. Like, people are willing to share their samples. And I love that. The only challenge is, with every version of SharePoint Framework, it's compatible with a different version of Node, for example, or different versions of Node. And so we've had samples. I mean, Waldek, I think you created one of the first samples ever
with the web part.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right. Which was
built in
SharePoint
Framework version 0. I don't know.
Yep. Yeah, I guess
early.
Did we? Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I remember when we created that, or Waldek created that. So that's the number one request. It's always the weather. So
it's been 84 years.
But here's the challenge: I looked at 3 issues that were opened by the community this morning. All 3 of them were people trying to download the web part, or the sample, trying to get it to work, and they say it doesn't work. But if you look at the version of Node that they're using, it's not compatible with the version of SharePoint Framework that the web part was built in. And so therein lies the challenge: is how do you create something that allows the community to keep on learning and randomly picking samples and not having to reinstall their entire machine, right? Like,
if only we had something in this space, right? If only.
If only.
If only. Well, introducing. So that's actually what I've been working on.
Funny you mentioned that.
And Waldek, thank you for helping me with this. But one of the things that we've been doing is we've been creating remote containers or dev containers in Visual Studio Code, so that you can actually open the solution in the environment in which basically the solution was built to work in, right? So Waldek, since the first version of SPFX, has been creating Docker containers that are designed to basically match the environment. Like, this is perfect for SharePoint 1.4.1. This is perfect for whatever 1.14. Here's the right version of Node, Gulp, and everything. Everything is pre-configured. And so what we've done is we've basically taken these containers and we've introduced them to every sample. So if you go, and we're going through every single sample, we're gonna have it to every sample eventually, but we go through and we say, okay, well, this web part was designed for SharePoint Framework, 1.12.1. Here's the environment that will work.
Yep.
And so that the cool thing about that is anybody can now, as long as they have Docker installed on their workstation, they can actually go and Visual Studio Code. They can open the solution in that container, and it will run it basically in a virtual machine, I guess, that's within their workstation that has the right version of Node and everything. It's kind of
but
like
you can
voodoo.
also you can also open it on the web in code spaces, right?
Yes, and that's actually where we're going with this, is that eventually, imagine the ability to say, you know what, I don't want to download this whole sample. I don't want to configure my machine. I just want to actually open it in the web in code space or connect to a remote code space container that's actually not on my machine, that's actually hosted in the cloud somewhere. And that's just amazing. Like, think about the barrier to, for someone to pick up a sample or to even get started. But the cool thing also is if you apply this technology or this approach to your internal solutions, like how many times as a developer did you have to open a solution, right? Like, remember the old Visual Studio days where it was like, oh, I have all these DLLs and I have all these dependencies and things like that. Yeah.
Hold on, like first you need to install 2 gigs of updates.
Yeah,
true.
Yeah.
Always when you open up Visual Studio Code,
Yes.
Visual Studio IDE. Yes. We
Yeah.
have an
Yes.
update pending. Okay, fine.
But that's the thing.
I'm gonna take a coffee.
What's the barrier for a new developer to join the team? Right.
Yes.
And how many times, I'm sure, Vesa, you've said this, where it's like, I can't even put this developer on this initiative because the time for them to get onboarded with this and get set up and everything, we're not going to be able to.
In the past, we worked around it with VMs, right? So we would walk around with these big external disks, 2 terabytes or more. And they had really big rig-size adapters to have them on power because they were that big. And we would run VMs, and you would have like 50 gig VM. There you go. Vesa still has one. It's covered in dust, but I bet it has just the right SharePoint 2010 image to run one particular problem. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right. So that was. It's the same problems we had over years, and that is how we addressed it in the past. Now it just got more convenient, I guess.
Yeah, I used to work for a consulting company where every client engagement, the client would give a laptop that was specific to their requirements, and then they would take the laptop, they would actually virtualize it and put it in a server rack somewhere, so that we could actually do our work. But imagine the infrastructure required to be able to So I want to update a weather web part. Now I need an entire kind of server farm just to be able to do that.
Yes,
it's crazy, and that's where dev containers, I think, is going to be amazing. Is like you apply this to your internal processes. Not only you have the entire solution and the packages or node modules that your solution is going to use, but here's the environment dependencies that are included with this solution. Now, if you don't want to use dev containers, it's fine. You can continue opening it directly in your machine as a local container or a local solution. But if you just want to kind of, I don't know, I need to do a quick fix on this web part, or I need to just test this sample, I can actually do that and have multiple versions of Node running on my machine at the same time.
Well, not in your machine. Well, kind of, but not really. So,
well, it's whatever magic it does behind the scenes. Like if I want to have, an SPFX 1.4 and an SPFX 1.12 and 1.14 open at the same time on different versions of Node, I can do that.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
I guess so moving on the dev containers and even the whole container and the model. This adaptation will have a challenge of adaptation for people to kind of understand the virtualization technique. And we tried this at some point with Docker, and people were not really super interested because again, it is to some level of a, let's say, abstraction, understanding what
like magic.
Well, it is partly a pragmatic. It's one of those things like I don't
It's just
understand
a
what's happening
VM.
here. I'm not gonna.
It's just a
it's
VM.
just a. I know, but that's the one thing what we need to, of course, be thoughtful is to explain the simplicity and what it is. Because if we think about this, always reminds me of coming back on early days of Windows Azure, not Microsoft Azure, when it was called the Windows Azure. We basically had everything as PaaS services, so PaaS services, platform as a service services, and Amazon actually beat us with IaaS because Azure didn't have it. Amazon had it. And what needed to be happened is basically introduce back to IaaS so that the on-premises computers and customers would be able to adapt IaaS model in the cloud so that they can understand, oh, now it's a VM, it's an operating system. Okay, I get it. And then they have a readiness to understand the next level, which is basically the PaaS level and the developer isolation of that. And that's one of the biggest challenges what we all the time have in IT, which is we talk kind of the same language, but not necessarily because the previous experience and knowledge is different. So talking about dev containers, I can imagine half of the audience is like, I know what they are, and every single one of them have a different.
And they're not.
But
I guess we're getting more and more ready on adapting that. So
yeah. I was just going to say, like, the one thing that I find really cool about this whole thing is, like, if you see what we've been doing over the last few months with sharing is caring, where we're showing people, hey, you can go to a GitHub repo and you can edit the solution in the repo without opening it locally, right, in the browser, and how to do pull requests and all that stuff, all web-based without doing anything. And now we're talking about running the entire solution without ever downloading it on your machine. Like the future is awesome. Think about all these customers that have, let's say in a banking industry, for example, where they can't install anything on their machine. But how are they expected to develop? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
So I think the opportunity there is huge.
Absolutely.
To create.
And it like concluded, it's just, I guess we're heading towards a time frame where the most of the people are understanding what this means in practice. So therefore the adaptation is there. So people are kind of ready to adapt that rather than like something like Kubernetes or whatever. It's like, sounds cool. I have no idea what that is, but you need to have some level of an understanding of what is a blockchain, why does it actually matter? So getting the maturity of community on the right level, and then we can again do a big leap forward as the developer community. So, and I'm pretty sure that already today a lot of partners are using Docker as their machines, but now we're kind of trying to make it immediately available then from the GitHub, which is awesome.
But to understand the value, right, and to adopt something, you need to adopt something, you need to understand the value. That's the thing. So what's in it for me? Why should I do this? Right, and that's the thing that we're trying to do now is let's make it easy for you to actually use this if you need to, and then you can reapply the same pattern to your own infrastructure, your own solutions. But you don't have to make that leap of faith and go, I don't know how this solution works and everything, because we're trying to take that and we're trying to lower that thing. I guess it's, if we go back to that whole conversation about, it's about creating kind of a secure, controlled environment where people can do their job while still empowering them to be able to make a difference. It's just, instead of using the Power Platform, we're now using, dev containers and things like that. But
and I guess that's
the whole circle.
Exactly, and that's where the community is in its purest or in its best, which is all about empowering the other people in the community. So helping other people to succeed in their work and helping other people to be successful and building stuff, regardless, is it a Power Apps, is it an SPFX, is it a C#, but that's where the power of the community is for sure. So, and this absolutely helps. Now, what's the status of this? So is it already available? Is it somewhere?
When? In other words, when?
It's already available. We've been going through from starting with the latest version of SPFX samples, going all the way down to Waldek's version of the SPFX sample. And so we've been actually adding containers to all the
Now
samples.
I'll be known across the world as the person with the
That's right.
oldest SPFX sample. There you go. You can know me from many things.
So we're adding containers to every samples, but it's actually happening. It's live now. You can start using dev containers for your samples, and we'll be demoing it on this upcoming Thursday call. On the
depending on when you're watching or listening to the video,
Yes,
of course, but
that's
but
right.
still. So
That's right. Click here.
exactly. And before you do that, or remember to subscribe. No.
But wait, if you subscribe now, you will get not one, not two, but 3 containers, and there is more.
That's right.
Now, I guess from a timing perspective, I guess we need to start closing in. Thank you, Hugo, for this one. Anything interesting what you're doing other than that this week? Anything interesting? Let's go do a weekly summary or final conclusions or sparks of mind.
So doing large hackathon with one of the largest government customer right now, which is interesting if you think about it. Government, which is not known for necessarily always wanting to innovate, and hackathon where they're saying, hey, we want to do some crazy new things. And I just love the energy, people that are saying, hey, we want to serve our constituents better. Are there new technologies that we can use to do this? So that's one of the things we're working on. Also getting ready for the M365 Collaboration Conference. I'm doing 3 workshops and 5 sessions.
At the same time?
Well,
Yes.
I hope they're not going to be at the same time. So that's going to be interesting.
Yeah. So that's the one which is in April in Las Vegas, right?
In April in Las Vegas, yeah. And then I'm pretty sure if we're traveling, we've got a few sessions in Scotland, Germany, places like that. But I'm not holding my breath right now, or maybe I am.
Traveling. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe it's good holding on your breath. So
That's right. I
will breathe in and breathe again in 6 months.
That's right. I can't wait to be able to get back to in-person events and things like that. We did it in December. Is it December? Yeah, December,
Yes,
November,
Las
whatever
Vegas,
it was, in Las Vegas.
2020.
It was 2021. It was amazing to see people and to see that people actually have legs, right? That was a but I'm really looking forward to the April event. I think it's hopefully we're all going to be in that energy of let's just start rebuilding the community, being in person again.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it.
Absolutely. And obviously, as we do that, we're not going to shut down anything virtual stuff either, because it's really important from a diversity and inclusion perspective. So for those people who cannot travel or their employers don't actually give them the money to travel on sites, so there has to be alternative options. But I guess the past 2 years, that's one of the blessings within this past 2 years is that we learned to do this remotely as well. And now heading to this hybrid mode. After the 2 years, hopefully, crossing fingers, it's starting to look a bit better. So maybe in 6 months we're in a normal
depending
status.
where you look, to be honest, but
yeah. Crossing finger. I guess we've heard about it starts looking better quite a few times in the past 2 years as well. So.
Exactly. And then
I
it's
think
not right.
The challenge with if you think about in-person events, right? They're localized usually, so making sure that the schedule suits everybody. That's easy because everybody's in person, everybody's in the same time zone. But the one thing that we've had to adapt to with remote events or online events was we got people from all over the world attending these calls. And so the one thing I think that we've learned, especially in the sharing and scaring sessions, is that because sharing and scaring is about hands-on, let's configure your workspace together. Let's do your first GitHub pull request together. So it's in person and we do multiple calls a day. But what we've started to do is record small videos where people can actually just watch those videos at their own pace at their own. And we're not trying to do hour-long videos. We're trying to do mini videos just to try to get the concept going. So I think that's a lesson learned that we need to continue even when we go back in person.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, Waldek, what's on your table? Let's do a quick roundup and then close up.
So I'm trying to see if we can improve the developer experience for Angular devs who want to build apps for teams. Right? Because at Microsoft, we focus internally on React. Community is embracing React a lot as well, but there are also other frameworks, among which Angular. And we think that over the course of years, there have been tons of line of business apps built in Angular. So why not have the ability to expose these apps in teams, right? So what would the developer experience look like? How can we tie into the experience an Angular developer has building an Angular app in context of teams, with all the things like AAD, AppBridge, building teams, deploying the teams manifest to teams, and so forth and so on. So with all that, how would that fit into as it's called, the inner loop? So basically the process developers follow to build the app, how we can combine these two.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. Now, on my side, quickly, 1.14 is coming quite soon, SharePoint Framework 1.14, with a lot of new updates, and the templates and all of that, project templates are going renewed. So that means that all of the existing tutorials will go through and rewriting and all of that. So what to be actually done on the doc side this week, because we promised that we'll ship it in mid-February. So let's see if we can hit a Valentine's Day gift for the community. So
ooh,
that would be
my wife is
going to
be happy.
So. Yeah.
Yes, Hugo is away.
Well, if we share it in 24/14th, it doesn't mean that you need to focus on it in 14th. So,
but it's a new version.
It's with love. So.
What's this thing? It's a weather web park, but it's built in 1.14.
Yeah.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's in container. Come on.
You don't have to install it on your machine.
What?
Cool. I guess it's time to close up. So thank you, Hugo, for joining. Really good discussion and awesome to see the container work. It looks really, really, really cool. And it's going to help a lot of thousands and thousands of developers and making their life easier. So thank you for driving that. And Waldek, I guess we'll jump on the article side of the house. So let's go through them and close up the call. But
Thanks
thank you
for
Hugo.
having me. Bye.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Hugo.
Cool. So welcome back with the interview with Waldek. No, just kidding. Thank you, Hugo, for joining us on the discussion today. Really good discussion, and the stuff, the simplify the testing and development is just spot on. It's just what we should be doing. So, I think we've been talking about the code spaces and making this happen for a while, but now we can actually really see how it can be actually done, which is really, really cool.
I mean, and it is like with everything else. It's about everything being in place, maturity of technologies that we have available, and then it just being the right time to do it.
Yep, exactly. Finding the right time so that people can accept or understand the value as well. So absolutely.
Yeah.
Cool. Anyway, so let's jump on the articles. So let me share my screen. And let's do a quick run through on things. So last week was the last of the month articles from the Microsoft Teams and SharePoint. So these are really, really good articles related on what's always new as a monthly summary. And they basically walk through all of the new features and capabilities and all of that stuff. And there's so much innovation and so much new features coming out in many forms and devices and whatever. The Teams is just exploding, which is really, well, Teams isn't exploding. That's the wrong way of saying that, right?
Evolving, not exploding.
Evolving.
It's very, very close.
That's pretty close. English is so hard, you know. Now, the next one, I'll let you to talk about this a bit. So
exactly. So another end of month article, in this case, a podcast episode from Mark Ashman, which is the SharePoint pit stop, SharePoint roadmap pit stop. Is that You moved the title
roadmap pitch stop is
SharePoint roadmap pitch stop, yes. In which he gives the latest updates about SharePoint new features, new releases, and again, great summary from Mark about what's new in SharePoint.
A lot of cool stuff and capabilities and features, and this also includes, for example, in the creation of workflows to the Power Automate, which is a really cool feature. That's, by the way, the interview with Yokesh. Yokesh is all about that one. His principal PM behind of that feature and a few others. And there's a lot of Microsoft lists, Viva features, and all of that getting listed here as well. So really cool stuff. A lot of innovation and new features. Now, the next one is from Nick Charlebois. So Microsoft Graph Data Connect deploying Azure Synapses Analytics. So basically, as we're exporting the Microsoft Graph data, which is a massive amount of data in the Data Connect side, we can then use the Azure Synapse Analytics for analyzing that. And he walks through basically the deployment step for doing that as a step-by-step guidance. And then there's a complementary article, which is this one.
Exactly. So
sorry.
if you combine, I'd assume since it's a set, you would do them both. You don't. It's okay.
Fine,
it's okay.
Fine.
So if you export multiple
script.
sets, how do you put them together into one? Right.
Yes.
So this article builds up on the previous one, showing you this additional case when you have multiple data sets. How do you bring them together into one?
Yeah. Really cool stuff. And that's a massive amount of data and manipulation of that. That is actually, I've seen internally, it's called Cosmos, which we're using, which is somewhat ideas which are now transformed to be in the Azure in multiple different services when you're manipulating petabytes and petabytes of data. So really cool stuff. Now, Aika had a new blog post related on Learn from the Community, Microsoft Teams and Moodle online learning solution. And this is a new series, what she's starting on every single Tuesday at 8 a.m. Pacific time. There's a video and a blog post scheduled, which talks about the different scenarios from a community perspective, and this is the first video. And there's a storyline and a discussion related on solution, whether using Microsoft Graph and with gathering student information, participation fees, and all of that stuff. So really cool video on how to build stuff in Microsoft 365, this case in education scenarios. And more to become on that one. Then we had a breaking change.
Exactly. We have a breaking change in the preview Microsoft Graph API. So again, no breaking change on the V10 endpoint. This is a breaking change in the beta endpoint, and in this case, one of the APIs for e-discovery. Right. So check out the post for more info about what has changed and if that impacts your code or not.
And then we also had a breaking change on the add to review set action in the Microsoft Graph for e-discovery. So similar kind of story again on the beta time endpoint, not in the production. As all of the feature crews are getting ready to get their stuff shipped, then that means that there are adjustments and naming changes and all of that stuff. So, which is good. And then we had something new.
Exactly. We had a new version of the Microsoft Graph Toolkit, version 2.3.2. Microsoft Graph Toolkit is you could say the easiest way to connect your app to Microsoft 365, right? It takes away all of the plumbing, all of the auth, allowing you to focus on building your app and showing the data that's coming from Microsoft Graph that you pull in your app. And there is new version of that available since last week with enhancements, improvements, new things. So definitely check it out, give it a try, and we'd love to hear from you. What else would you like to see us improve, add to it, and so forth and so on?
Yep, really cool. Great stuff from that team. Then there's a new podcast from M365 of Microsoft 365 Developer Podcast by Paul Schaffelin and Jeremy Fake. And they had an interview and discussion with Juan Balmori, and he's a long-term program manager in the Outlook side of the house. So basically building Office add-ins and scenarios on those. And they have a nice discussion on what's the latest on that area. And then we move to the community.
Yeah, then we had an article. Yes, we have a community article from Siddharth Agassia about how to call and show Graph API data in SharePoint Framework Adaptive Cards extension. So these are the things that you would build for Viva connections, desktop and mobile. And Siddharth shows how you can show data from Graph.
Yeah, This is a kind of a classic scenario on the latest emails which have arrived on your inbox. It's one of those, well, will you just enter ACE or will you actually just open up an Outlook on your mobile? But again, it's just a connectivity demo to the graph and to show how easy it is to do. Then we had a blog post from Kasper Boo Larsen, don't pay more for SharePoint stories than you have to, which is all about the number of versions. So the same applies actually in the SharePoint Online, so you need to be careful about the versioning history and versioning options. Classic challenge in on-premises from a storage perspective.
Yep. Then we have another article from Shrusti Shah. It's about Microsoft Forms as a tab in Teams using Graph API in Power Automate. So it's a multi-cloud scenario that combines Power Platform with Teams and Forms. It's a really great way to show like how you can tie them together to have this easy, accessible, and interactive form.
Really cool. Then we had a awesome blog post from Vartman from Valo Solutions related on working with the Microsoft Graph Communications API in Microsoft Teams meeting app, and really great story and well, borrowing some graphics from the Microsoft side as well on how do we do that integration, how do we integrate with the bot framework and do that in the code and build engaging experiences with that setup. So really, really cool stuff. Thank you, Vartman, on that. And then something free.
Yes, then in February this year, we will have, or you will have, a free SharePoint sign design training from no one less than Laura Rogers. Check out her site for more info about where and when and how.
Yeah, excellent. Then we had a blog post from Abby, Shuffle an Array with Power Automate. He actually did a community call demo on this one last week as well. So basically, how do we shuffle an array and randomize results on that in Power Automate? Really, really cool stuff. So for sure. And then Chris O'Brien had a new blog post.
Yeah, so Chris has been having series about SharePoint syntax and what you can do with it, how does it apply, how it works and so forth. And now he has a great post that underlines or explains 5 real-world tips regarding syntax and how you work with that, how you apply it in practice. Definitely check it out.
Yeah, I think the real-world scenarios and real-world tips are always really good to have. Then we had a blog post from Sergey, building a proxy provider for SharePoint Framework and Microsoft Graph Toolkit. So really kind of a deep diving on the Graph Toolkit usage scenarios inside of the SharePoint Framework. So really, really cool stuff from him. Then Andrew Connells had a new blog post.
Yes, exactly. So we have new article from AC about Gulp. How you use Gulp in SPFX, what are the do's and don'ts, and how do they impact you when you switch between different versions of SPFX? If you do, definitely check it out because it might save you some of the headaches that he would have otherwise.
I actually run into this one a while back as well, but good that somebody's blocking
use
about
Docker.
it, so that's really good.
Use Docker.
Docker is the solution, yes. Then on the Recording 365, Lorian Strand had a migrating planner board to list, and this cool scenario because you could actually have quite complex scenarios also in the Microsoft lists to managing your tasks. So it's up to you which you want to use, and he talks about how you can transition and those options over there. Then we had a video from Giuliano De Luca.
Yes, exactly. About how can you add a like and dislike button in SharePoint lists. So we've seen a lot of improvements to lists over the last weeks, months. And now we have this another case, like how can you add dislike and like options to lists, which are a great way to track interest. Anything else regarding like how can you vote on things in your list.
Absolutely. Really good stuff. Thank you, Giuliano, on that one. And 2 more videos. So Paolo had a new video related on working with SharePoint Online libraries and files with Microsoft Graph. So really, really cool stuff from him. And these are great short to-the-point videos from Paolo. So thank you for that one. And then April Dunnan had a great video.
Last but not least video from April Dunham about how can you personalize Power Apps, or how can users personalize Power Apps in colorblind mode, which is a really great thing to think about even when you think about making apps that really work for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Really, really cool stuff. Now, let's actually close that one. We already went through what's going to happen in this week. So just to speed up the time, I guess it's
How about we're going to see what's going to come the next week? Another episode of PnP Weekly.
That is true. Remember PnP Weekly hashtag to tag your blog posts so we now understand what's happening. And see you again next week, or listen, or audio. Anyway, so later.
See you, everybody. Bye.
Bye.